Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to The Sanctuary. I'm your host, Professor C, and we're going to do some more A&P today. Specifically, I'm going to talk about a structure of muscles and tendons and ligaments known as the rotator cuff. So, let's check it out. Okay, observe these actions, and what do they share in common? I think it's going to be pretty obvious based on the title of the talk, but here we have a softball pitcher. Here it looks like we've got a cricket bowler. And if we look down here, we've got a basketball player slamming it down behind the back. And then we've got a gymnast flipping around on the rings. If these athletes did not have really well developed and strong rotator cuffs, they'd probably be blowing out their shoulders right now. If I tried to do, say, the rings apparatus right now, I would definitely blow my shoulders out. So let's talk about the structure known as the rotator cuff, which is actually a collection of smaller pieces. So the rotator cuff muscles are basically, as we've said in other talks before, but I wanted to sum it up here, they keep the humerus, that is the long arm bone, squished inside, if you want to use technical terms there, the glenoid cavity of the shoulder bone or the scapula. Now, it's called the glenohumeral joint, and it's not just one joint though. There are many types of tissues holding these structures together. If you want to learn the muscles of the rotator cuff, you just have to apply what's called the SITS rule. And yes, that is a little T there, big S, big I, little T, and another big S. And this stands for supraspinatus, which is the muscle right here. I'll put an S, big S on. And then infraspinatus, which is the big muscle under here. And if you want to see some of the details on them, go back and look at the previous talks, and you can see the details on these muscles. Little t. Little t because it's teres minor, and that's the guy right here. Remember, teres major would stick here and kind of go in between there, but we're ignoring teres major because he's not technically part of the rotator cuff muscles group. The other guy is subscapularis, and he's the one on the front, if you will, of the scapula. So there he is. There are the four muscles that make up the rotator cuff. Now, it's not just the muscles that make up the rotator cuff. Of course, there's some tendons and some ligaments that hold all this in place. Now, just to kind of go through here real quick, where I'm putting the X on this muscle, this will be subscapularis, so I'll just put sub right there. This one here, this pointing to, that's supraspinatus, so I'll put supra, just to show that supraspinatus. This little dot is on a clavicle right there, the bone. This is the, I'm not going to spell it out here, but this is the acromion. So this is an acromioclavicular. I'll just put AC, and that's going to be a ligament. Remember, ligaments hold bone to bone. So there's the acromioclavicular ligament, or the AC lig. And then here's the coracoid process right there, poking out from the front of the scapula. So we have some more ligaments here, some coracoclavicular ligaments right there. We have kind of a trapezoid one and a conoid one holding those bones together. Now over here on the humerus end, we see just barely here, I'm going to outline it there, we just barely see the tendon, remember a tendon holds a muscle to a bone, of infraspinatus, the one underneath the spine. Here we see the tendon of supraspinatus. And here we see the big tendon of subscapularis in front of the scapula. Now down here, here's little t. There's teres minor. We can't see much more of him in this shot, but there he is. Now this down here is not really important to us right now. That's the long head of the biceps brachii. We'll talk about that in the next talk. Okay, here's a much more complicated picture of all the attachments and structures associated with the shoulder capsule. I'm not going to go through all this detail here, but really what I want to show you is these bursa. We talked about bursa in the synovial joints talk, and how they are fluid-filled sacs filled with synovial fluid. In these freely movable diarthrotic joints, these synovial joints, where you can have, the ability to spin it in almost a complete circle, like doing a pitch that we saw with the softball, you need some padding in here. The problem is sometimes that padding can lead to its own problems. So check this out. To have a disorder of the rotator cuff, there could be any number of problems. It could originate from any one of the pieces that create the rotator cuff. So an overuse tendonitis would be just as it sounds like. You've pulled on the tendon too much here, and it's causing an aching or a soreness over time. You could get a full-blown tear, probably not of the muscle itself, probably of the tendon, but I guess you could technically tear the muscle as well if it's a really bad injury. And of course, that may require some kind of intrusive surgery to correct it. It may not correct on its own, and if it does, it may not correct in the proper way, and you could lose some function. Now, impingement is kind of like it sounds. It kind of like it sounds like it has the word pinch in there, even though it's pinge. So an impingement syndrome is where you have, say, overgrowth of bone on the acromion. See how these little bubbles of bone here are not normal if you look at the other acromion processes in the picture. And that overgrowth of bone is squeezing down or pinching, impinging the bursa underneath. It's called the subacromial bursa. And that can cause, of course, pain or pressure on the tissue below it. Of course, the kind of pain associated with this is going to be a dull pain, sometimes described as being deep in the shoulder, sometimes hard to pinpoint. Depending on the position of the arm, it could actually change the position of the pain. Of course, this could lead to weakness if it is a chronic kind of condition. And you know this because it's hard to reach behind the back. So it's hard to like comb your hair or scratch your back or do any kinds of those actions because there's pain when you try to rotate this rotator cuff. It, of course, can disturb sleep, and it is a problem in a lot of people in the world that shoulder pain disturbs their sleep. Now, here's a different kind of shoulder pain. This is called mouse shoulder, and as you can see how she's sitting here, that is not what you want to be doing, even though some of you listening to this are probably sitting like this. If you could see my setup right now, a lot of the times you see me reaching out for my mouse, and that's not good. What you want to do is you want to have your elbow kind of anchored to a table, and you want your wrist to move back and forth and glide along the surface of the table. If you've got your shoulder stretched out like this and your elbow stretched out, it can lead to problems. And it's got a name now. It's called mouse shoulder. And it's just a collection of signs and symptoms experienced by people who sit and use a mouse for long periods of time, like many, many people do in the world today. So it's usually a pain on one side of the neck is where it starts, and you wonder, why does my neck hurt? And you don't really blame it on the mouse at first, but then it spreads down the neck to the shoulder and becomes really a problem that you have to change your habits to deal with. And it will go away if you change your habits. All right, I've put a summary of the rotator cuff muscles here. I've given their origins and insertions. Even though I've done that on a previous talk, I've just put them all four here so you can see them all together. And that's for you. Hope you enjoyed that little talk on the rotator cuff. Thanks for watching it to the end, and check out some other videos about A&P if you want to. See you for the next one. Bye-bye.